Daniel never believed in fate.
He was the kind of guy who thought life was just a series of random events that people tried to make sense of later. But that rainy Thursday afternoon changed everything he thought he knew about coincidence and destiny. The rain came out of nowhere. One moment he was walking down the street with his sketchbook tucked under his arm, and the next the sky opened up like someone had turned on a massive faucet. He ran toward the closest shelter he could find, which happened to be his usual coffee shop on 5th Street. When he pushed through the door, dripping wet and slightly embarrassed, he realized he wasn't the only one with that idea. The place was absolutely packed. Every single table was occupied, and there was a line of people waiting to order, all shaking rain from their jackets and hair. Daniel ordered his usual black coffee and turned to scan the room, hoping to find even a small corner where he could sit and wait out the storm. That's when he noticed her. She was sitting alone at a table by the window, typing something on her laptop, completely absorbed in whatever she was working on. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she had this focused expression that made her look both serious and approachable at the same time. He hesitated for a moment. Daniel wasn't usually the type to approach strangers, especially women he found attractive. His last relationship had ended badly 2 years ago, and since then, he'd kept his distance from anything that even remotely felt like it could lead to emotional attachment. But the coffee shop was crowded, it was still pouring outside, and he needed somewhere to sit. He walked over to her table and cleared his throat. "Hey, sorry to bother you, but would you mind if I shared this table? Everywhere else is completely full." She looked up from her laptop, and when her eyes met his, Daniel felt something shift in his chest. She had these incredibly expressive eyes that seemed to smile even before her mouth did. "Of course," she said, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "I don't bite. Well, not on Thursdays anyway." Daniel laughed, feeling some of his nervousness fade away. He sat down, placing his coffee and sketchbook on the table. He tried to give her space, not wanting to interrupt her work, but he couldn't help stealing glances at her. There was something magnetic about her presence, something that made it hard to look away. After a few minutes of comfortable silence, she closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair. "So are you an artist?" she asked, nodding toward his sketchbook. "Oh, this?" Daniel touched the worn leather cover of his sketchbook. "Sort of. I'm a graphic designer, but I draw for fun. It helps me clear my head. Can I see?" she asked. And there was genuine curiosity in her voice, not just polite conversation. Daniel felt a flutter of anxiety. He rarely showed his personal drawings to anyone. His professional work was one thing, but his sketches were different. They were personal, intimate even. But something about the way she asked made him want to share. He pushed the sketchbook toward her. She opened it carefully like she was handling something precious and began flipping through the pages. Daniel watched her face as she looked at his drawings, mostly scenes from around the city, people he'd observed, little moments he'd tried to capture. She didn't rush through them or offer generic compliments. She actually studied each one, taking her time. "These are beautiful," she said finally, and he could tell she meant it. "You have this way of capturing emotions in people's faces. This one here," she pointed to a sketch of an old man feeding pigeons in the park. "It makes me feel something. That's rare." Daniel felt his face grow warm. "Thank you. That means a lot. I'm Maya, by the way," she said, extending her hand across the table. "Daniel," he replied, shaking her hand. Her grip was firm and confident, and just like that, they started talking. Really talking. Not the surface-level small talk that people usually have with strangers, but actual conversation. Maya told him she worked in marketing and was currently stressed about a big presentation she had to give the next week. Daniel told her about a difficult client who kept changing their mind about a logo design. They talked about the city, about their favorite spots, about books they'd read and movies they'd loved. Time seemed to disappear. The rain kept falling outside, creating a cocoon of sound that made their conversation feel even more intimate. The coffee shop slowly emptied out as people left, but neither of them seemed to notice or care. At one point, Maya was telling him about a trip she'd taken to Spain the previous year, and she got animated, using her hands to describe the architecture she'd seen in Barcelona. She leaned forward to point at one of his drawings that reminded her of a building there, and as she did, she lost her balance slightly. Her hand came down on his chest to steady herself, and then she left it there, just for a moment. Maybe 3 seconds, maybe 5. But in those seconds, Daniel felt like the entire world had gone quiet. Her hand was warm against his shirt, and he could feel his own heart beating faster beneath her palm. She must have felt it too, because when she looked up at him, there was this knowing smile on her face. It wasn't awkward or uncomfortable. She didn't pull away quickly or apologize. Instead, she held his gaze, her hand still resting on his chest, and smiled like she already knew something he didn't. Like she could see exactly what was happening to him in that moment, and she wasn't afraid of it at all. When she finally did move her hand away, she did it slowly, deliberately, letting her fingers trail slightly as she pulled back. "Sorry," she said, but her tone suggested she wasn't sorry at all. "I get clumsy when I'm excited about something." Daniel couldn't find words. His brain had essentially stopped working. All he could think about was the warmth of her hand and that smile that seemed to say she already owned a piece of him. They stayed in the coffee shop until the staff started putting chairs up on tables, subtle hints that it was time to leave. When they finally walked outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets wet and shimmering under the streetlights. "I should get going," Maya said. But she didn't move to leave. "Yeah, me too," Daniel replied, also not moving. They stood there for a moment, neither wanting to be the first to walk away. Finally, Maya pulled out her phone. "Give me your number," she said. Not, "Can I have your number?" or "Would you like to exchange numbers?" Just a simple, confident statement. Daniel gave her his number and she called him right there so he'd have hers. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and when he pulled it out, he saw she'd saved herself as Maya from the coffee shop. "Text me," she said, giving him one last smile before turning to walk away. Daniel stood there on the wet sidewalk, watching her disappear around the corner, his phone still in his hand. He felt like he'd just been hit by something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't just attraction, though that was definitely part of it. It was something bigger, something that felt both exciting and terrifying at the same time. He started walking home, but his mind was still back in that coffee shop, replaying every moment of their conversation, every smile, every laugh, and especially that moment when her hand rested on his chest and she looked at him like she already knew all his secrets. When he got home, his roommate took one look at him and laughed. "Dude, what happened to you? You look like you just got struck by lightning." Daniel sat down on the couch, still slightly dazed. "I think I just met someone," he said quietly. "Like met someone. "Yeah," Daniel nodded. "Exactly like that." That night, lying in bed, Daniel kept thinking about Maya's smile, about the confidence in the way she'd left her hand on his chest, about how natural their conversation had felt. He thought about texting her but didn't want to seem too eager. He thought about waiting a day or two but didn't want her to think he wasn't interested. Finally, around midnight, he gave in and sent her a simple message. "Thanks for letting me share your table today. Best random Thursday I've had in a long time." Her response came almost immediately. "Random? I don't think anything about today was random at all." And with those words, Daniel knew his carefully constructed walls were already starting to crumble. 2 weeks had passed since that rainy afternoon, and Daniel felt like he was living in a completely different world. He and Maya had been texting constantly. Not just the usual "how was your day?" messages, but real, meaningful conversations that lasted hours. They'd gone on 3 dates, and each one had felt more natural and easy than the last. Their first date had been at a small Italian restaurant in the neighborhood. Daniel had been nervous, worried that the connection they'd felt in the coffee shop wouldn't translate to a planned meeting. But the moment Maya walked through the door, wearing a simple blue dress and that same confident smile, all his anxiety melted away. They'd talked for 3 hours, long after they'd finished eating, until the waiter had gently suggested they might be more comfortable continuing their conversation elsewhere. The second date had been his idea. He'd taken her to an art gallery that was featuring a local artist he admired. Maya had been genuinely interested, asking questions about the techniques and styles, wanting to understand what he saw in each piece. Afterward, they'd walked through the city, their hands occasionally brushing against each other, neither quite brave enough to make the first move to hold hands properly. That had changed on their third date. Maya had suggested they go to a vintage bookstore she loved, and as they browsed through the dusty shelves, she'd simply reached out and taken his hand, intertwining her fingers with his like it was the most natural thing in the world. Daniel's heart had nearly exploded in his chest, but he'd tried to play it cool, squeezing her hand gently to let her know he was okay with it. More than okay, actually. But as much as Daniel was falling for Maya, part of him was terrified. He'd been hurt before, badly, and he'd promised himself he wouldn't let anyone get that close again. His ex-girlfriend had left him feeling broken and stupid for believing that love could actually work. He'd spent 2 years building walls around his heart, and now Maya was casually dismantling them like they were made of paper. His best friend Ryan had noticed the change in him immediately. They were having coffee together one Saturday morning, and Ryan had been watching Daniel check his phone for the 5th time in 10 minutes. "Okay, who is she?" Ryan finally asked. Daniel looked up, trying to act innocent. "What are you talking about?" "Dude, you've been smiling at your phone like an idiot for the past 2 weeks. You're either in love or you've discovered some really good memes. And knowing you, it's definitely the first one." Daniel sighed, putting his phone down. "Her name is Maya. I met her at the coffee shop a couple weeks ago." "And?" Ryan prompted. "And I think I'm falling for her. Fast, like way too fast." Ryan's expression shifted from amused to concerned. "Daniel, man, you need to be careful. After what happened with your ex—" "I know," Daniel interrupted. "I know it's probably too fast. I know I should slow down. But I can't, Ryan, she's different. That's what you said about the last one." The words stung because they were true. Daniel had thought his ex was different too. He'd thought they had something special, something that would last. And then one day she'd told him she didn't love him anymore, that she'd actually been unhappy for months but hadn't known how to say it. The betrayal hadn't just been in the breakup, but in the realization that he'd been completely blind to what was really happening. "Maya is not like that," Daniel said, more to convince himself than Ryan. "She's honest and direct. She says what she means. She's not playing games." Ryan leaned back in his chair, studying his friend. "Just promise me you'll be smart about this. Don't lose yourself in this relationship. Don't forget who you are." Daniel nodded, but even as he did, he wondered if it was already too late. Maya had become such a big part of his life in such a short time. She'd started showing up in ways that felt both wonderful and slightly overwhelming. She'd remembered that he mentioned loving a specific bookstore, and one day he'd found her browsing there when he stopped by. She'd shown up at his friend's birthday party after he'd casually mentioned it, fitting into his friend group like she'd known them for years. She remembered tiny details from their conversations, how he liked his coffee, that he had a complicated relationship with his father, that he'd always wanted to visit Japan. It should have felt perfect, and in many ways it did. But sometimes, late at night, Daniel would lie awake and wonder if this was all too good to be true. He'd wonder if he was setting himself up for another devastating fall. He'd wonder if Maya could really be as genuine as she seemed, or if he was just seeing what he wanted to see. About 3 weeks into whatever they were calling this, they hadn't officially labeled it as a relationship yet, Maya invited him to her apartment for the first time. She'd cooked dinner and they'd eaten while sitting on her couch, talking about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. As the night grew later, the conversation grew deeper. They'd moved from lighthearted stories to more vulnerable territory. Maya told him about her parents' divorce, about how her dad had left when she was 12 and she'd spent years thinking it was somehow her fault. She told him about her struggles with anxiety, about how she sometimes woke up in the middle of the night feeling like she couldn't breathe, afraid that everything good in her life would disappear. Daniel found himself opening up in return, telling her about his ex, about how the breakup had made him question everything about himself. He told her he was scared of getting hurt again, scared of trusting someone completely only to find out he'd been wrong. Maya had listened without interrupting, her hand resting on his knee. When he finished talking, she was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose her words carefully. "Daniel, what are you afraid of?" she asked softly. "Right now with me. What's the fear?" He took a deep breath. "I'm afraid of how much power you already have over my emotions. I'm afraid that I'm falling faster than you are. I'm afraid that one day you'll wake up and realize I'm not what you want and I'll be completely destroyed." Maya shifted closer to him on the couch. She took his hand and placed it over her heart. He could feel it beating rapidly beneath his palm. "Feel that?" she asked. "I'm terrified too. My heart is racing because I'm just as scared as you are. I'm scared that I'm too much, that I come on too strong, that I'll scare you away. I'm scared that my career ambitions will make you feel neglected. I'm scared that you'll realize I'm not as confident as I pretend to be." Daniel looked at her in surprise. She'd always seemed so self-assured, so certain of herself. It had never occurred to him that she might be vulnerable too. "We're in this together," Maya continued, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "If I fall, you fall. That's how this works. We're both jumping off the cliff here and we're both terrified, but at least we're doing it together. Something in Daniel's chest loosened at her words. He wasn't alone in his fear. They were both taking a risk, both making themselves vulnerable. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and she melted into his embrace. They sat like that for a long time, holding each other, both trying to be brave enough to let this thing between them grow into something real. When Daniel left her apartment that night, walking home through the quiet streets, he felt different. The fear was still there, but it felt manageable now, shared. He pulled out his phone and texted Maya, "Thank you for tonight. For being honest. For being you." Her response came quickly. "Thank you for seeing me. The real me. Not just the confident version I show the world. Sleep well." Over the next few weeks, Daniel and Maya fell into a rhythm. They saw each other almost every day, sometimes for elaborate dates, sometimes just to grab coffee or take a walk. They met each other's friends. Daniel introduced Maya to Ryan, who pulled him aside later and admitted, "Okay, I get it now. She's different." Maya introduced Daniel to her roommate and her close friend from college. They welcomed him warmly, and he could see they were protective of Maya but seemed to approve of him. Everything felt right. Everything felt like it was building towards something permanent and real. Daniel started to relax, to let himself believe that maybe this time, love would actually work out. He should have known that life doesn't work that way. He should have known that the moment you start feeling secure, that's when the universe throws you a curveball. It came on a random Tuesday evening. Daniel was at Maya's apartment and they were cooking dinner together, laughing about something silly when Maya's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and her expression changed instantly. "I need to take this," she said, stepping into her bedroom and closing the door. Daniel continued cooking, trying not to eavesdrop, but he could hear the muffled sound of her voice through the door. The conversation lasted about 10 minutes, and when Maya came back out, she looked troubled. "Everything okay?" Daniel asked. Maya nodded but didn't quite meet his eyes. "Yeah, just work stuff. Nothing to worry about." But Daniel could tell she was lying, or at least not telling him the whole truth. For the first time since they'd started dating, there was a wall between them. They finished cooking dinner, but the easy atmosphere from earlier was gone. Maya was distracted, answering his questions with short responses, clearly lost in thought. Daniel didn't push, figuring she'd tell him when she was ready. But as the days passed, Maya didn't bring it up, and Daniel found himself getting more and more anxious. Something had shifted, and Maya decided to take the job. It wasn't an easy decision, and it involved many late-night conversations, tears, and moments of doubt. But ultimately, she couldn't turn down the opportunity, and Daniel didn't want her to. They both knew that asking her to give up her dream would poison their relationship eventually. So 3 months after that rainy day in the coffee shop, Daniel found himself helping Maya pack up her apartment, loading boxes into a moving truck, and trying not to think about how empty his life was about to feel. On Maya's last night in the city, they didn't do anything special. They just ordered takeout, sat on the floor of her empty apartment surrounded by boxes, and talked about everything and nothing. When it was time for Daniel to leave, they held each other for a long time, neither wanting to let go. "This isn't goodbye," Maya whispered. "It's just see you soon." "See you soon," Daniel repeated, trying to believe it. The first few weeks of long distance were harder than either of them had expected. They'd agreed to video calls every night, but between Maya's demanding new schedule and the 3-hour time difference, finding time was challenging. Some nights one of them would be exhausted or stressed, and what should have been a pleasant conversation would turn into a series of yawns and half-sentences. Daniel threw himself into his work, taking on extra projects to keep himself distracted. He'd wake up, go to work, come home, call Maya if she was available, and then fall asleep. Repeat. The days started to blur together, and he realized he'd been defining his entire existence around their relationship. Without Maya physically present, he felt like he'd lost part of himself. One particularly low evening, Ryan showed up at his apartment with pizza and refused to leave until Daniel actually talked to him. "Dude, you're a ghost," Ryan said, settling onto the couch. "When's the last time you hung out with anyone besides me, showing up uninvited?" Daniel shrugged. "I don't know. I've been busy with work." "No, you've been hiding. There's a difference." Ryan opened the pizza box and grabbed a slice. "Look, I get that you miss Maya, But you can't put your entire life on hold while she's gone. That's not healthy for you, and it's not healthy for your relationship. What am I supposed to do? Daniel asked, frustrated. Just pretend I'm fine with her being gone? No, but you need to remember who you were before Maya. You had hobbies, friends, interests. You can miss her and still live your life. Daniel knew Ryan was right, but it felt impossible. The truth was, he'd been neglecting parts of himself for a while now, even before Maya left. He'd stopped drawing for fun, stopped going to art galleries, stopped meeting up with friends unless they made the effort to track him down. Over the next few weeks, Daniel made a conscious effort to reclaim his life. He started drawing again. Not client work, but personal pieces, the kind of art that made him remember why he'd fallen in love with creating in the first place. He started going to the gym with Ryan. He even joined a weekend sketch group that met at a local park. As he rebuilt his individual identity, something interesting happened. His calls with Maya got better. He had more to talk about, more to share. He wasn't just waiting for her to fill the emptiness in his life. He was living his own life and including her in it. Maya was going through her own transformation. The new job was intense, pushing her in ways she'd never been pushed before. She was working longer hours than ever, proving herself in a competitive environment where she didn't know anyone. The pressure was enormous, but she was thriving. She told Daniel about her wins and her struggles, about difficult colleagues and supportive mentors, about projects that excited her and ones that kept her up at night. And Daniel listened, genuinely interested, asking questions, celebrating her victories, and offering support when things were tough. But long distance also revealed cracks they hadn't noticed before. Small misunderstandings would escalate because they couldn't read each other's body language. Text messages would be misinterpreted. Plans to visit would fall through because of work commitments. About 2 months into the separation, they had their first major fight. Maya had mentioned she'd been spending a lot of time with a colleague named Alex, who'd been helping her navigate the office politics. She talked about Alex frequently, how smart they were, how helpful they'd been, how they'd grabbed dinner together after work a few times. Daniel tried not to be jealous. He tried to be the cool, trusting boyfriend. But the more Maya mentioned Alex, the more insecure he felt. Finally, during a video call, he couldn't hold it in anymore. "So you and Alex seem pretty close," he said, trying to keep his tone casual. Maya immediately picked up on the edge in his voice. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Just an observation." "Daniel, if you have something to say it." "Fine. It just seems like you spend more time with Alex than you do talking to me lately." Maya's expression hardened. "Are you seriously doing this right now? Are you actually accusing me of something?" "I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm just saying that I'm here trying to be supportive while you're there building this whole new life with new friends, and I'm starting to feel like I don't fit into that life anymore." "So what, I'm supposed to not make friends? I'm supposed to sit alone in my apartment every night pining for you?" The fight escalated from there, both of them saying things they didn't quite mean, both feeling hurt and misunderstood. Eventually, Maya ended the call saying she needed space. Daniel sat in his apartment feeling sick. He knew he'd handled that badly. The jealousy, the accusation, it was all his insecurity coming out in the worst possible way. He didn't sleep that night. He kept picking up his phone to call her, then putting it down, not knowing what to say. Around 3 in the morning, his phone buzzed. A text from Maya. "I miss you. I'm sorry I got so angry. Can we talk tomorrow?" "I miss you too. I'm sorry for being jealous and insecure." "Tomorrow," he replied. The next evening, they had a long, honest conversation. Maya admitted that she had been enjoying the attention from Alex, and that it felt nice to have someone physically present who understood the pressures of her work. But she also made it clear that her feelings for Alex were purely platonic, and that she would never jeopardize what she had with Daniel. Daniel admitted that the distance was bringing out all his old fears and insecurities, that he was struggling with the lack of control, with not being able to be there for her physically. They established clearer boundaries. Maya agreed to be more mindful about how she talked about other people in her life, to include Daniel more in her daily experiences, rather than just the highlights. Daniel agreed to trust her more, to communicate his fears before they turned into accusations. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. About 3 months into the long-distance arrangement, Daniel surprised Maya. He'd been saving money and planning in secret. He took a week off work, booked a flight, and showed up at her apartment on her birthday completely unannounced. When Maya opened the door and saw him standing there with flowers and a goofy grin, she burst into tears and threw herself into his arms. They stood in her doorway, holding each other and laughing and crying at the same time, while her neighbors walked past giving them amused looks. That week together was exactly what they both needed. Daniel got to see Maya's new life, meet her colleagues including Alex, who turned out to be a kind, happily married person, who clearly thought of Maya as just a friend. Maya got to show Daniel around her new city, sharing her favorite spots and introducing him to the life she'd been building. They fell back into each other easily, all the distance melting away when they were physically together. They cooked together in her tiny kitchen, stayed up late talking, explored the city, and just enjoyed being in the same space again.